In the heart of the lush and vibrant village of Umunna, nestled between rolling hills and ancient forest, lived a woman whose life was a tapestry of joy, sorrow, and hard-earned wisdom. Ifunanya's journey, marked by a desperate pact with the devil and the tragic fate of her children, transformed her from a figure of pity into a revered elder whose story became a guiding light for generations. Her tale is not just a cautionary legend but a profound lesson in resilience and the human spirit's capacity for redemption. As we delve into the life of Ifunanya, one must ponder, what lengths would you go to fulfill your deepest desires, and at what cost? In the heart of the lush village of Umunna, nestled between rolling hills and dense forest, lived a woman named Ifunanya. Umunna was a place of serene beauty, where the air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the symphony of chirping birds. The village was a tight-knit community, where everyone knew each other's names and stories. Traditional mud huts with thatched roofs dotted the landscape, each adorned with intricate carvings and vibrant paintings that told tales of ancestors and gods. Ifunanya's home was one such hut, modest but meticulously maintained. The walls were painted with scenes of harvest and celebration, symbolizing prosperity and joy, things that had eluded Ifunanya despite her diligent efforts. Her husband, Chibuzo, was a tall, strong man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. He worked as a farmer, tending to the yam fields that stretched out towards the horizon, their green leaves swaying gently in the breeze. Chibuzo's love for Ifunanya was evident in every gesture, from the way he held her hand to the soft words he whispered to comfort her. Despite the affection of her husband and the beauty of her home, Ifunanya carried a heavy burden. She had been married for 10 years, yet her womb remained barren. In Umunna, children were considered the highest blessing, a sign of favor from the gods. The whispers of her neighbors and the pointed comments from her in-laws stung like nettles. Her mother-in-law, Neka, was particularly harsh, often reminding her that a woman's worth was measured by the children she bore. Neka was a formidable woman, her presence commanding respect and fear in equal measure. Her sharp tongue and piercing gaze were legendary in the village. She had borne 6 children herself and took great pride in her large family. Her disappointment in Ifunanya was palpable, and she never missed an opportunity to voice her displeasure. A woman without children is like a tree without fruit, she would say, her words cutting deep into Ifunanya's soul. Ifunanya's days were filled with silent prayers and offerings at the village shrine. The shrine was a sacred place, located at the base of a towering iroko tree, its roots twisting and turning like the veins of the earth itself. She sought help from the elders, who gave her herbs and charms, but nothing seemed to work. She would often sit by the river that ran through Umunna, its clear waters reflecting her troubled face, and ask the gods for mercy. Her husband, Chibuzo, tried to console her. He would often take her on long walks through the yam fields, pointing out the beauty in the simplest of things, the way the sun set over the hills, casting a golden glow over the landscape, or the way the rain nourished the earth, bringing forth new life. But despite his efforts, Ifunanya could see the longing in his eyes whenever he watched children playing in the village square. Desperation clawed at her heart, and one fateful night, she made a decision that would change her life forever. Under the cover of darkness, Ifunanya slipped away from her hut and ventured into the forbidden forest. The forest was a place of mystery and danger, where ancient trees towered like sentinels and the cries of nocturnal creatures echoed through the night. It was said that deep within the woods, beyond the reach of light, dwelled a being of immense power, a devil who could grant any wish for a price. With each step, the trees seemed to whisper warnings, but Ifunanya pressed on, driven by a desire that outweighed her fear. At the stroke of midnight, she reached a clearing where the moonlight cast an eerie glow. There, amidst the shadows, a figure emerged. The devil, known as Amodi, appeared as a tall, dark-skinned man with piercing red eyes and a voice that sent shivers down her spine. "What do you seek, mortal?" he asked, his voice echoing through the forest. "I seek a child," Ifunanya replied, her voice trembling. "I want to be a mother." The night air grew colder as Ifunanya stood in the clearing, facing Amodi, the devil of the forest. The moonlight reflected off his dark skin, giving him an otherworldly glow. His red eyes seemed to pierce through her, reading every hidden thought and fear. The forest around them was silent, as if holding its breath in anticipation of the pact being formed. Amodi's grin widened as he took a step closer to Ifunanya. "You desire a child more than anything else in this world, don't you?" he asked, his voice silky and dangerous. Ifunanya nodded, unable to speak. The weight of her decision hung heavily in the air, yet the thought of finally becoming a mother was too powerful to resist. "Remember, mortal," Amodi continued, "what I give, I take away tenfold. Are you truly ready to pay the price for your desire?" Ifunanya's mind raced. She thought of Chibuzo's longing eyes, Neko's biting words, and the silent judgment of the villagers. She thought of the empty space in her heart that only a child could fill. Desperation and hope mingled within her, pushing her to a decision. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steadying. "I am ready." Amodi's laughter echoed through the forest, a sound that sent chills down Ifunanya's spine. He raised his hands, and the air around them seemed to crackle with dark energy. "Very well," he said. "Your wish is granted. You will bear a child, but never forget the cost of this gift." He reached out and touched Ifunanya's forehead. She felt a searing pain, and then darkness enveloped her. When she awoke, she was lying at the edge of the forest, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. Her head throbbed, but she felt a strange warmth in her belly, a flicker of life that hadn't been there before. With trembling hands, she touched her abdomen and smiled, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. She knew that she had been given what she asked for. Ifunanya returned to the village, her steps lighter than they had been in years. The villagers watched her with curiosity, noting the change in her demeanor. She walked straight to her hut, where Chibuzo was waiting, his worry evident in his eyes. "Where have you been?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Ifunanya smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her face. "I went to the forest to pray," she said, avoiding the details of her encounter. "And I believe our prayers have been answered." Months passed, and to everyone's amazement, Ifunanya's belly began to swell. Joy filled her heart, and the village celebrated her miracle. Neko's harsh words turned into praise, and Chibuzo's eyes sparkled with pride. Ifunanya felt a flicker of hope reignite in her soul, believing that the worst was behind her. As the pregnancy progressed, Ifunanya noticed strange things happening. Her dreams were haunted by visions of darkness and fire. She would wake up in a cold sweat, feeling the presence of something sinister watching over her. The twins within her seemed to be constantly restless, their movements fierce and unrelenting. She brushed off her fears, attributing them to her anxiety and the toll of pregnancy. The day Ifunanya went into labor was filled with both excitement and trepidation. The village midwives, experienced and kind, gathered in her hut. They boiled water, prepared herbs, and whispered words of encouragement as Ifunanya's labor pains intensified. The entire village seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the miracle that would mark the end of Ifunanya's long journey of barrenness. As dawn broke, the cries of two babies filled the hut. The first to emerge was a strong, healthy boy. His cries were loud and powerful, as if announcing his arrival to the world. Ifunanya held him close, tears of joy streaming down her face. Shortly after, a girl followed, her wails just as fierce. Ifunanya named them Umunna and Chioma, meaning a father's heart and good fortune respectively, hoping their names would bring the blessings they signified. The village erupted in celebration. Drums were beaten, songs were sung, and the aroma of feast prepared in Ifunanya's honor filled the air. Neka, who had once been her harshest critic, now praised Ifunanya for her strength and resilience. Chibuzo's pride knew no bounds as he showed off his newborn children to anyone who would look. However, the joy was short-lived. From the moment they were born, Umunna and Chioma were different. As infants, they cried inconsolably, their wails piercing the calm of the village and disturbing the peace. Ifunanya and Chibuzo tried everything to soothe them, but nothing seemed to work. The twins' restless energy only grew with time. As toddlers, their mischief knew no bounds. They would sneak out of the house at all hours, causing havoc wherever they went. They disrupted village gatherings, stole food from market stalls, and fought with other children. Their antics became the talk of the village, and the once celebrated miracle turned into a source of shame and embarrassment for Ifunanya and Chibuzo. Chibuzo tried to discipline the twins, but their rebellious nature seemed unbreakable. Ifunanya's heart ached as she watched her children spiral out of control. She remembered Amodi's warning and wondered if this was the beginning of her penance. The twins' behavior strained Ifunanya's relationship with Chibuzo. The once happy couple now argued frequently, their love overshadowed by the chaos their children brought into their lives. The situation worsened when the twins started school. Their disruptive behavior escalated, and they often found themselves in trouble with their teachers. They were defiant, refused to follow rules, and their constant fighting made them a menace to their classmates. The villagers began to avoid Ifunanya and Chibuzo, their whispers of disapproval and judgment stinging like nettles. Years passed, and Umunna and Chioma grew into young adults. Their mischief evolved into more sinister acts. They formed a gang, terrorizing not only the village of Umunna but also the surrounding areas. Their crimes ranged from theft and extortion to violence and intimidation. Their gang, known as the Black Shadows, became infamous, and their reputation spread far and wide. The twins' home became a fortress. They acquired wealth through their criminal activities, building a grand compound at the edge of the village. The compound was heavily guarded, with armed men patrolling day and night. Inside, the twins lived in luxury, their every whim catered to by servants who dared not disobey them. Umunna and Chioma dressed in fine clothes, adorned with jewelry that sparkled in the sunlight. They rode through the village on horseback, their presence striking fear into the hearts of the villagers. They reveled in their power, knowing that even the king dared not challenge them. Their mother, Ifunanya, watched in silent horror as her children descended further into darkness. She refused to accept any of the money they offered her, choosing instead to live in her modest hut, far removed from the opulence of their compound. She could not bear to touch the wealth that was tainted by their evil deeds. The villagers were trapped in a state of perpetual fear. They whispered about the Black Shadows and their ruthless leaders, but no one dared to speak out against them. The twins' influence reached even the palace, where the king, once a figure of authority and respect, now cowered in fear of the twins' retribution. Despite their wealth and power, Umunna and Chioma were never satisfied. Their hunger for control and domination grew, leading them to commit even more heinous acts. They targeted neighboring villages, expanding their reign of terror. They demanded tribute from the villagers, who paid in fear of losing their lives. Ifunanya's heart broke a little more with each passing day. She had once dreamed of a loving family, but now she lived in a nightmare of her own making. She had brought these children into the world, and now their actions were tearing it apart. She remembered the warning from Amodi, the devil she had bargained with, and realized with a heavy heart that the true cost of her wish was more than she could bear. The twins' criminal activities reached a new height when they planned a grand heist to rob the king's treasury. They gathered their gang and laid out their plans with meticulous detail. On the night of the heist, they moved with the stealth of shadows, breaking into the palace and overpowering the guards. The king, a once proud and dignified leader, now stood helpless as Umunna and Chioma ransacked his treasury. They took everything of value, leaving the king humiliated and powerless. The villagers woke the next morning to find their king's wealth gone and their oppressors even richer. Ifunanya could no longer stand idly by. She decided to confront her children, hoping to appeal to whatever shred of humanity remained in them. She made her way to their compound, her steps heavy with dread. When she arrived, the guards, recognizing her as their leader's mother, reluctantly allowed her inside. The twins were lounging in their opulent living room, surrounded by the spoils of their latest heist. Ifunanya stood before them, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and determination. Umunna, Chioma, this madness must stop, she pleaded. You have brought nothing but pain and suffering to our village. Please, for the sake of our family, end this reign of terror. Umunna laughed, a cold and mirthless sound. Mother, you are too old-fashioned. We are powerful now, and we will not stop until we control everything. Chioma nodded in agreement, her eyes glinting with ambition. We are destined for greatness, Mother. This is our path. Ifunanya's heart sank. She realized that her children were too far gone, their souls corrupted beyond redemption. She left the compound, her hope shattered, and her spirit broken. She knew that drastic measures were needed to stop them. Desperation drove Ifunanya back to the forest where she had first encountered Amodi. Her steps were heavy with regret as she navigated the familiar path. The once serene forest now seemed more menacing, with twisted roots and gnarled branches reaching out like claws. The air was thick with an ominous presence, and the darkness seemed to close in around her. The clearing, bathed in eerie moonlight, felt colder and more foreboding than ever. When Amodi appeared, his grin was even more sinister. He stood tall and imposing, his red eyes glowing with malevolent delight. I see your children have brought you nothing but sorrow, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Ifunanya fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Please, I beg you, make them stop. I can't bear this any longer. Amodi's eyes gleamed with malevolent delight. There is a way to end your suffering, but it comes at a cost. Are you willing to pay it? If it means my children will stop their evil ways, I'll do anything, Ifunanya sobbed. The only compromise is to make them run mad, Amodi said, his voice cold and unyielding. Madness will be their fate. Ifunanya hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But the thought of her children continuing their reign of terror was unbearable. With a heavy heart, she agreed to Amodi's terms. "I accept," she whispered, her voice trembling. Amodi's grin widened. He raised his hand, and a dark, swirling mist enveloped Ifunanya. The air crackled with dark energy, and she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "It is done," Amodi declared, his voice echoing through the forest. "Your children will face the consequences of their actions." Ifunanya stumbled back to the village, her heart heavy with sorrow and fear. The next day, strange things began to happen. Umunna and Chioma, once so sharp and cunning, began to show signs of madness. They spoke in incoherent sentences, their once brilliant minds now clouded with confusion. They lashed out at anyone who came near, their behavior erratic and unpredictable. The village watched in a mix of horror and relief as the twins' power crumbled. The once feared leaders of the Black Shadows were now a pitiful sight, wandering the village aimlessly, their eyes vacant and their actions irrational. The gang quickly disbanded, unable to follow the erratic commands of their leaders. Ifunanya's heart shattered as she saw her children's descent into madness, but she held on to the hope that their suffering would bring an end to the terror they had wrought. She cared for them as best as she could, though their madness often made them violent and unpredictable. She would often find them at the edge of the village, muttering to themselves or screaming at invisible foes. Chibuzo, too, was devastated by the turn of events. He had hoped for redemption for their children, but instead, he watched them deteriorate before his eyes. The once proud father now carried the weight of their downfall, his spirit broken by the burden of their madness. The villagers, though relieved by the end of the twins' reign of terror, pitied Ifunanya for the suffering she endured. They whispered amongst themselves, sharing the tragic tale of the woman who had bargained with the devil and paid a heavy price. Days turned into weeks, and the madness of Umunna and Chioma only deepened. They roamed the village and the surrounding forest, often disappearing for days at a time. When they returned, they were disheveled, their clothes torn, and their eyes wild with a look that sent shivers down Ifunanya's spine. One evening, as the sun set over Umunna, casting long shadows across the village, Ifunanya found herself by the river, the same place she had prayed for children all those years ago. The clear waters reflected her troubled face, and she whispered to the gods for guidance. She knew that the journey she had embarked on with her desperate wish had led her family into darkness. The villagers heeded her warning, and Ifunanya's tale became a cautionary story passed down through generations. The lesson was clear: desperation could lead one down a dark path, and the price of such decisions was always higher than one could imagine. Despite the chaos and sorrow that had befallen her, Ifunanya continued to care for her children. She fed them, clothed them, and tended to their wounds, both physical and mental. Her once bright and joyful life was now filled with constant vigilance and an aching heart. Each day was a battle, but she remained steadfast, hoping that someday, somehow, her children would find peace. Umunna and Chioma's madness grew worse with each passing day. They wandered the village aimlessly, their eyes vacant and their actions erratic. The villagers, though relieved by the end of their reign of terror, pitied Ifunanya for the suffering she endured. They whispered amongst themselves, sharing the tragic tale of the woman who had bargained with the devil and paid a heavy price. One fateful night, Umunna and Chioma disappeared into the forest. Ifunanya searched for them frantically, her heart gripped with fear. She had seen the dark transformation in her children, but the thought of them lost and alone in the wilderness filled her with dread. For days, Ifunanya scoured the forest, calling out their names. The dense undergrowth and the eerie silence of the forest amplified her despair. She found remnants of their presence, torn pieces of clothing, broken branches, but no sign of her children. The villagers, too, joined in the search, their torches flickering in the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with malice. It was on the seventh day that Ifunanya stumbled upon a clearing she had never seen before. There, at the edge of a steep cliff, she saw Umunna and Chioma. They stood precariously close to the edge, their eyes wild and unseeing. They were muttering to themselves, their words a jumbled mix of incoherence and despair. Umunna! Chioma! Ifunanya cried out, rushing towards them. Her voice seemed to break through their madness for a moment. They turned to look at her, their expressions a mixture of confusion and recognition. Tears streamed down Ifunanya's face as she reached out to them, her heart aching with a mother's love and fear. Please, come away from the edge, she pleaded, her voice trembling. Come back to me. For a moment, it seemed as though her words might reach them. Umunna took a hesitant step towards her, but then Chioma's face twisted in anger. She grabbed her brother's arm, pulling him back towards the edge. The madness had taken hold of her completely, and in her twisted mind, the cliff represented an escape from the torments they had endured. No, we can't stay. Chioma screamed, her voice filled with a raw, primal fear. We have to get away. Umunna, torn between his mother's love and his sister's desperation, looked back at Ifunanya one last time. His eyes, filled with pain and confusion, met hers, and in that brief moment, she saw the boy he once was. Then, with a final, heart-wrenching scream, Chioma pulled him over the edge, and they both disappeared into the abyss. Ifunanya's scream echoed through the forest, a sound of pure agony and loss. She rushed to the edge, her heart pounding in her chest. Peering over, she saw their broken bodies lying motionless at the bottom of the cliff. The sight tore at her soul, and she collapsed to the ground, her cries of grief mingling with the rustling of the wind through the trees. The villagers found her there, hours later, still weeping. They gently led her back to the village, their hearts heavy with sorrow for the woman who had lost everything. The tragedy of Umunna and Chioma's lives and deaths became a somber tale, a reminder of the dire consequences of making deals with dark forces. The lesson learned and a legacy of wisdom. Ifunanya returned to the village, a shadow of her former self. She had paid a heavy price for her desperation, and the villagers saw the toll it had taken on her. Her once bright and joyful life was now filled with constant sorrow, her days a blur of grief and regret. The whispers that once judged her barrenness now pitied her loss, and the villagers began to see her as a tragic figure, a living cautionary tale. Ifunanya decided to share her story with anyone who would listen, hoping to prevent others from making the same mistake she had. She would gather the children of the village and tell them her tale, her voice filled with sorrow and wisdom. Whatever the devil gives, he always takes more, she would say, her voice trembling with emotion. If the devil gives you a cap, he'll come back to take your whole head. Desperation can lead you down a dark path, and the price is always higher than you can imagine. Her story resonated deeply with the villagers. They began to heed her warnings, understanding that the pursuit of shortcuts and dark bargains could lead to ruin. Ifunanya's tale became a moral lesson, passed down through generations as a reminder of the dangers of making deals with dark forces. The elders would often repeat her words, ensuring that her wisdom was not forgotten. Despite the chaos and sorrow that had befallen her, Ifunanya continued to live in the village. She found solace in helping others, using her experiences to guide and counsel those in need. She became a revered elder, her advice sought by many who faced difficult choices. Her once bright home, now a place of reflection and learning, became a sanctuary for those seeking guidance. Ifunanya's resilience and dedication to sharing her hard-earned wisdom earned her the respect and admiration of the village. She devoted her life to helping others, hoping to atone for her past mistakes. She became a beacon of hope and redemption, her story a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Her legacy grew as the years passed. The village of Umunna thrived, its people guided by the lessons learned from Ifunanya's tale. The children who had listened to her stories grew up to be wise and cautious adults, their decisions shaped by the warnings of their elders. Ifunanya found a semblance of peace in knowing that her story had made a difference. She knew that her children's tragic fate had not been in vain. Their lives, though marked by madness and sorrow, had taught the village an invaluable lesson. Ifunanya's tale was a reminder that the easy path often led to the most suffering and that true wisdom came from facing life's challenges with courage and integrity. In the end, Ifunanya's life, though marked by tragedy, became a source of hope and guidance for those who followed. As she looked out over the village she had once feared to face, she knew that her story had made a difference. The villagers continued to honor her, and her legacy of wisdom and resilience endured, ensuring that her hard-earned lessons would never be forgotten. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to get more epic African tales.